Hello, and welcome to the State of 911 webinar series hosted by the National 911 Program. My name is Sherry, and I will be the moderator for today's session. This webinar series is designed to provide useful information for the 911 stakeholder community about federal and state participation in the planning, design, and implementation of next-generation 911, or NG 911, systems. It includes real experiences from leaders utilizing these processes throughout the country. Today's session will feature presenters from the Integrated Public Alert and Warning System, or IPAWS, and the Idaho State Police. Chief Mark Lucero with IPAWS will provide an overview of the Integrated Public Alert and Warning System, and Captain Kevin Haight, Commissioner with the Idaho Public Safety Communications Commission, will discuss how the state of Idaho used the recommended minimum training guidelines for 911 telecommunicators. For more information on future National 911 Program webinars, or to access archived recordings or learn more about the National 911 Program, please visit 911.gov. Feedback or questions about the webinars can be sent to national911team@mcp911.com. If you are experiencing technical difficulty with the WebEx application, please call WebEx Technical Assistance at 1-866-229-3239 and select option 1. Please note that all participants' phone lines have been put in a listen-only mode and this webinar is being recorded. To ask questions of our presenters, feel free to take one of two actions. Using WebEx's chat feature located on the right-hand side of your screen, enter your question at any time during the presentation and it will be entered into the queue. This feature is not visible while your screen is in the full expanded page view. Or, to ask your question live, use the Raise Hand feature to request your phone line to be unmuted and you will be called upon to ask your question. With that, I would like to introduce Ms. Lori Flaherty, Coordinator for the National 911 Program. Lori, please go ahead.
Thanks, Sherry. We have two great speakers for you today, and let me introduce the first one. Mr. Mark Lucero is the Engineering Branch Chief for IPAWS with FEMA's National Continuity Programs. He's been in that position since about 2009. Before that, if those of you are familiar with the Department of Defense, he was with DISA, the Defense Information Systems Agency, so a really strong background in information sharing environments. Mr. Lucero will provide an overview of the Integrated Public Alert and Warning System, or IPAWS. Mark, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and thank you to the audience for carving out a piece of your day to listen to some speakers talk about alert and warning and then also talk about 911. I really appreciate it. As was stated, I'm the Chief Engineer with the IPAWS Division, and I was asked to give a presentation on IPAWS, kind of explain to the PSAP 911 community as to what the system is and how you might be able to use it. You may be familiar with some of these alert and warning messages. These are the ones that show up on your cell phone, like an Amber Alert or a flash flood warning typically is what people have been getting. And you might have thought, hey, that's really annoying. How can I use that too in order to get public alert and warning messages out? And so hopefully I'll be able to answer that question today with this presentation. Next slide, please. So briefly, these are the bullets I wanted to hit on. And hopefully by addressing some of these bullets should answer any questions that you have about IPAWS. So I'll move on to the next slide, please. So first off, why are we here? Why was IPAWS created? We use this slide really to let people know that the program was established based on a bona fide need through policy and through regulation and through law. It wasn't a pilot program someone thought was a good idea. This is actually, the system was purpose-built. The first one, Executive Order 13407, said that the president needed to be able to communicate to the public over as many pathways as possible under all circumstances. A recent IPAWS Modernization Act, this is the actual legislation that was put in place to take the existing system and make it better. And then the FCC has provided some regulatory guidance to broadcasters and cell carriers to ensure that they can participate in alert and warning properly. Next slide, please. So how did we do this? We were given our requirements to make a system that was resilient, reliable, and reached the public over many pathways. Really the only way that we could do that was to adopt a common standard for communication. So we adopted what's called the Common Alerting Protocol, which is an international standard for public alert and warning messaging. And essentially it's a container that where you can put all the information about your alert message, who needs to get it, what they should do, what different multimedia audio files would be associated, references to incidents, onset time for the event or the incident, and then expires time when the public or what action the public should take, that sort of thing. So this is really the glue that connects all these pieces. So if you look at this picture, you can see public safety on the left can create a message using this standard message format. IPAWS sits in the middle to collect all these messages and then essentially hand off to and maintain the connections with television, radio, cellular, cell carriers, and other devices, no weather radio, other devices that the public has on their person or in their vicinity so that they can receive those messages, those alert and warning messages. And the idea here is that if you communicate the information over many channels, you increase the chances that the public will see it. Next slide, please. So you may be asking, who can send alerts through the system? What's the process? And this is it in a nutshell. It's a 4-step process, not necessarily in 1, 2, 3, 4 order. Unfortunately, that's how the slide is written. But really, these steps can be taken simultaneously. But the gist is, the first step, you need to have alert and warning software in order to create those messages in that standard format. Some of the most popular ones that we see are Everbridge, Code Red, Nixle, WebEOC, EMNet. There are a number of alerting software vendors out there that are compatible with IPAWS, and chances are you may already have one. So that was the first step, is for you to obtain software. The second step is to sign an agreement with FEMA, essentially saying, I want to use IPAWS to send public alerts, and I promise not to do anything bad with the system. That's kind of what that agreement says. Let's skip to the fourth step. The fourth step is to take an online training course. It's about 90 minutes, and it's hosted through the Emergency Management Institute, EMI, which some of you may be familiar with. It's a very high-level overview of what IPAWS is and how you can use it to send alert and warning messages. That third step that I skipped, I wanted to focus on that one. It's pretty important. The FEMA doesn't want to circumvent any existing state laws or state plans that are already in place for public alert and warning. So we do include the state in this process. You can get access to the system, but you need to coordinate with the state in order to finalize your public alerting authority. Essentially what that means is if you want to send evacuation messages or amber alerts or nuclear power plant warnings, we want to make sure that your request to send these alert messages is consistent with any state law or state plans that are in place. So we have a number of contacts typically it's the state emergency management agency that handles this for us, but we ask that coordination happens before you're actually able to hit the button to send an alert to the public. Next slide, please. So that's kind of an overview of what it is and how you get access. Wanted to touch on a little bit of information about how it's being used today. So next slide. This is a snapshot of at the county level, essentially, the alerting authorities that can send alerts today. If you could go back, thank you very much. Slide 10 here. I didn't include the states in this graphic because the whole country would be green. We have all 50 states can send alerts through the system. Some states have more than one entity that can send alerts. That would be like your state police and the state emergency management agency, things of that nature. We do have 3 Native American tribal governments that can send alerts, including the Navajo Nation, which I think is the largest one that we have connected to IPAWS, and then two territories. But this is kind of a snapshot of if you are in one of these green areas of the country, chances are there is a county emergency management agency, or maybe it's a sheriff's office that can send you an alert to your cell phone or send an alert over TV and radio going through the IPAWS system. Next slide. Oops, and just a note on the last slide, we'll stay here, but the National Weather Service and the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children are also alerting authorities. Chances are, if you've got an alert that came from them, they do have nationwide jurisdiction, and I believe they're the ones who use the system the most. Next slide, please. So I mentioned that Amber Alerts and Weather Alerts are the ones that most people see. I think 98 or 97%, something like that. 97% of all alerts that come through the system are weather alerts. So how are state and locals using it? Well, this kind of graph kind of shows over time how we've seen an increase in the usage. I think if you look at the beginning of when IPAWS came about, you'll note that there wasn't very much activity, and I think that's because we didn't have a lot of state and local emergency management, public safety on board. But once people started to get those annoying messages on their phone, I think people started to say, hey, how can I use that too? So we started to see a lot more adoption, a lot more usage. There's a few spikes in this chart, and I just kind of attempted to try and explain what was going on during that spike in activity, and that's kind of depicted there. Saw a lot of use last month for the hurricanes and tropical storms, and we were very pleased to see that it was used quite effectively. So moving on to the next slide, please. And just a breakdown of what are these messages that people are sending. If you're familiar with the Common Alerting Protocol, you'll know, or with the Emergency Alert System for that matter, you may be familiar with what are called event codes. And this is kind of a breakdown of what types of alerts are being sent. Most of these are local area emergency, LAE, followed by civil emergency messages, law enforcement warnings, and fire warnings, and so on. But I thought this was interesting to get kind of a feel for, at the state and local level, what kind of messages are being sent out. If this were a pie chart showing all the weather alerts, you would probably see that flash flood warnings make up the lion's share, followed by tornado warnings. Next slide, please. Slide 13. Yes, slide 13. This is just a snapshot of some of the alerts that were sent out. These are all wireless emergency alerts going to cell phones sent out for the hurricanes and tropical storms. I think I won't read all of these to you, but I think you'll see that for the most part, a lot of these messages are telling people to either shelter in place or only use 911 in case of an emergency, that sort of thing, trying to ensure that the public understands that if your first responders are available, but I think that in cases where they say, hey, only use 911 in cases of emergency, I'm sure the dispatch has been inundated with calls, and they're trying to prioritize and triage as best they can. And hopefully this was pretty helpful in sort of ensuring that the messages that do come through to the 911 are the most critical need. But you can get a general sense of the type of information that they were pushing out to the public at that point. Another interesting one here was in Florida. They said, hey, let's keep your generators outside the house. Sometimes you actually do have to tell people that, unfortunately. So moving on, I think we have another. Yeah, this is another kind of interesting item with wireless emergency alerts. It's only 90 characters, and it doesn't take a lot of these special characters that like if you're typing in Microsoft Word and you put in this one islands apostrophe S, it takes the apostrophe and turns it into the fancy. It's called an acute accent, and it's not actually an apostrophe. And sometimes the system chokes when it gets these messages. That hyphen is not actually a hyphen at the top. That's called an EN dash. It's a kind of a special character, but again, the system chokes when it sees these messages. So if you are sending alerts and you are typing things into Word just to get your message correct and then copying and pasting into your alerting tools, your software, be aware that sometimes this can break the message and create errors. Next slide. And this is something FEMA sent out. They had it was a local phone problem where all the 911 calls were being routed to different counties. Some were going clear across the state. So they wanted to use wireless emergency alerts to tell people, and they sent each of these to each of the counties or each of the areas. And they said, hey, if you're in this county, use this phone number instead of using your cell phone to dial 911, or use a landline. And the problem here was that the rules for WIA said you cannot include a URL in your message and you cannot include a phone number in your message. So they were pretty creative in working around that phone number prohibition. So if you look a little closely, you can see that they replaced the zeros with capital O's, and they replaced some of the ones with lowercase l's. And that was able to trick the system so they can get their message out, which is great. I think that these folks, they saw that there was an immediate need, and they will do what they need to do in order to make sure that the public gets the safety information that's required. And incidentally, this prohibition on URLs and phone numbers has actually been relaxed, and I'll talk a little bit about that in the next few slides. So if you would please, next slide. So what's changing? We'll talk about these changes right now. Next slide. So I pulled out one of the slides to talk a little bit about the history. The system as it is today, the wireless emergency alert, is based on standards and regulations that were written almost 10 years ago. And at that time, they thought, if you include a URL or a phone number, it might clog up the system. And there was also a technical limitation on some of the cell carriers for message length. So we're increasing message length from 90 to 360 characters, including a new alert category, which is not as extreme as imminent threat message. So it would be kind of like I suppose like a boil water or a suspicious activity kind of message. Removing the prohibition on URLs and phone numbers, support for Spanish, and then including the ability to send test messages, live test messages. So these are great improvements that we're really looking forward to. Next slide, I think we're talking a little bit about, on the next slide, some of the other ideas that they're looking at. These are not set in stone. These are just under consideration, should I say. And the ones that are most important are the ability to send not only text, but also images to your phone, especially thinking Amber Alerts or suspicious suspects or person of interest. This would be great. In this day and age, there's no reason why. And I think that the public has the expectation that the technology should be able to support this. And so they're looking, the FCC is looking at, hey, is this feasible? Also improving the ability to target messages so that there's less bleed over. So these will be great as well. So next few slides, I'm running out of time here, so I'll really just kind of touch on what's going on with this NAC subcommittee. I mentioned at one of the first slides that there was a public law, the IPAWS Modernization Act. Part of that act said we need to set up a working group under the National Advisory Council made up of industry and practitioners to essentially tell FEMA, hey, this is how you need to fix IPAWS or make it better. The punchline here is that October of next year, these groups will submit recommendations to FEMA, and then we'll go ahead and start working on them. Next slide. There are 4 subcommittees or working groups under the subcommittee, and we're looking at, these groups, they're looking at how can we improve the alert messaging itself, what kind of special accommodations should we make for public to receive these messages, to include people with limited English proficiency or special needs. Also, stakeholder engagement and coordination. We're looking at how can we improve public receipt of these alerts, public reception. And that's almost like a public outreach campaign to say, hey, this thing is in your phone, this is how it works, that sort of thing. And then, of course, future technologies. How can we leverage what's on the horizon and in people's pockets today that we can't use? And I think we'll probably, who knows where that's going to go, virtual reality, augmented reality, who knows. I think one of the problems is that if you're not connected via cell phones or via the internet, then you're not going to get an alert through IPAWS. Maybe there's a way that we can reach people who are disconnected, so to speak. But I think that was the last of my slides. Next slide. Yeah, if you want to reach us, IPAWS@FEMA.dhs.gov. We'd be happy to speak with you. And I believe we're holding questions till the end, so I will go ahead and turn it back to the moderator. Thank you very much.
Sure, thank you. Actually, we will now have question and answer period. And as a reminder, you can either raise your hand or enter your question in the WebEx chat feature located on the right-hand side of your screen.
Thank you, Sherry. Our first question, how does IPAWS work for non-English speaking citizens?
Great question. The standard, the Common Alerting Protocol standard that we use will support multiple languages. In fact, when we tested the national EAS system just last month, we included English and Spanish in that message. And the broadcasters, based on the language that their format is, they had the freedom to choose the language that they would put over the air. So if you're Spanish language station, they have the freedom to pull the Spanish language message and play that over the air. So there are a lot of pieces in the chain. The first piece, of course, is that the public safety entity that creates the message needs to accommodate whatever languages that their jurisdiction, whatever demographics that there are in that jurisdiction. The IPAWS system needs to support that, and we do through the Common Alerting Protocol. And then, of course, downstream, your cell phones, your TV and radio, and whatever other thing the public has on their person have to be able to support those multiple languages. So today, the emergency alert system can support multiple languages, and as you saw in the previous slide, wireless emergency alert is going to support Spanish in the near future. So we're hoping that that will be expanded to other languages as well.
Thank you. The next question, as of today, how many PSAPs are connected to IPAWS as originators of WEA alerts?
That's a really good question. I don't have that specific answer for you. I do know that we have several 911 call centers that are connected to IPAWS. I would venture a guess it's probably wildly wrong. I would say probably about 40 or 50, which is actually one of the reasons that we jumped on the opportunity to speak to this group. We do need to break through to some of the 911 folks to let them know that they have the ability to use this system. So hopefully we'll be able to engage these stakeholders and ensure that they know that they can use the system and bring them online to use it if they wish. So I think a wild guess would be about 40 or 50. But I will see if I can figure out a better, more accurate number and share that with the group.
Thank you. Is there an entity that monitors messages so that it isn't abused and used, for example, political messages?
Yes. Interestingly, it's the public. A lot of times the people who create these alerts in some way, shape, or form up the chain, they fall under an elected official. If the public takes issue with an alert that's sent, they can vote with their feet, or maybe they can, I think that's the wrong word, but they can make their voices known through their voting. We haven't seen that happen yet, but essentially there are a couple of protections. One is in the rules of behavior that they sign. They have to use it for legitimate purposes. But there's nobody sitting in a chair looking at every message and hitting the approve button. It's all automated, and it's all done through the agreements that are set up front. Of course, if someone does abuse the system, if it's a security violation, of course we'll shut them down. But if it is like in poor taste or something of that nature, we let the public respond to the alerting authority, and then they can work that out through their own chain of command, I suppose. Hopefully that's a decent answer to that question. Apologize.
Yes, thank you. Are the working groups looking at WEA to examine more precision location capabilities to better pinpoint message recipients based on their location?
Yes, absolutely. They are looking at, as part of the future technologies, they're looking at, so today the wireless emergency alerts are targeted, they're geo-targeted based on the cell tower's location. And if you know how cell towers work, they kind of, it's not really a circle, it's almost like a pie, and it sends out the alerts to the pie shape that's pointed in the direction of the area. Kind of hard to explain, it's better to draw the picture, but the Future Technologies Working Group is looking at different concepts in device-based geo-targeting using your cell phone and its GPS coordinates, things like that, and they'll make recommendations back to FEMA. Of course, the ultimate, I guess, it's really the regulatory body, that's the FCC, that would control how the cell carriers would participate. However, all this information gets funneled back up through the, and we work with the FCC on a regular basis, and we work with the cell carriers on a regular basis. So a lot of this information is already being discussed, but there are a number of technologies and a number of techniques that are being discussed, which are promising to improve the geo-targeting of wireless emergency alerts over what we can do today.
Is there a way that people can find out if an agency has signed up for IPAWS?
Yes, there is. And I don't think I can put the website up right now, but if you go to www.fema.gov/IPAWS, there's a link in there where you can view the alerting authorities that are either in process or have completed and are online. So we keep a list of those agencies that can use the system. But I'll send an email over to the moderator with that link in it. So if there's a way to get that out to the audience, they'll take care of that.
Thank you. Are you recruiting members for various subcommittees? And if so, how can someone join?
I believe that all that work had already happened earlier this year and even, I think, late last year. The subcommittees have been formed. The membership is already finalized and approved. I don't think there's a way to get on the subcommittee. However, the subcommittee is, the working groups are looking for good speakers to share information about new ideas and new technologies. So if you are interested in working with one of the subcommittee's working groups, please send an email to IPAWS, and we'll route that to the proper individual so that they can speak with you.
All right. I believe we might still have a few more questions. Thank you, Chief Lucero. We're going to go ahead and move on to our second speaker, and then we'll pick up those additional questions at the end of the webinar. So, Lori, if you would like to introduce our second speaker, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Sherry. Captain Kevin Haight is with the Idaho State Police, and he is also a commissioner with the Idaho Public Safety Communications Commission. Captain Haight is also the chairman of Idaho's PSAP Standards and Training Committee, and as of July 1st of this year, Idaho transitioned from being a state where only voluntary standards and training existed to now having a state-mandated training standard. It took a whole committee of very tenacious, smart, and savvy people working together for 7 years to achieve this success. I had the chance to hear Captain Haight talk about this summer, and what they've done in Idaho is really impressive. So we're glad to have you with us today. Kevin, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Lori. I appreciate that introduction very much. And thank you to you attendees for taking time out of your busy Tuesday morning. What I hope to accomplish with this PowerPoint here over the next few minutes is just give you a snapshot of kind of what we did in Idaho, what worked for us. I know there's a number of states that still need to achieve this objective, and so hopefully I can be a help in that regard. A little bit about just the governance of the Idaho Public Safety Communications Commission and the PSAP Standards and Training Committee, just so everybody kind of understands the framework with which the committee worked in. The Public Safety Communications Commission is Idaho's 911 commission, essentially. They have some level of governance over the collection and disbursement of 911 dollars, and they have a radio piece to the commission as well. So it's not just the 911 telephony side, but the commission also looks at interoperability issues across the state and those kinds of collaborating things. They have a number of subcommittees, and as Lori stated, I am a commissioner on the 911 commission appointed by the governor. I represent the colonel of the state police. They have a number of subcommittees, and the subcommittee that I chair is the Idaho PSAP Standards and Training Committee. That committee was formed back in 2010, and it was given a number of objectives by the 911 Commission for them to work on. The biggest objective that they were assigned to work on was moving Idaho from a voluntary standards state to a mandated standards state. They're also heavily involved in providing regional trainings quarterly, and they do an annual PSAP conference in Idaho. But again, the real big one was the moving standards from voluntary to mandatory. 7 years it took to actually see this come to fruition. So for those out there that are listening that may have experience with trying to do this, you cannot be faint at heart, I guess, would be one of my points to make. You've got to stay tenacious. As you see on my slide, the committee is comprised of regional representatives. Idaho is split into 6 regions, and those representatives are chosen from city PSAPs, county PSAPs, and we have a couple of state representatives that work in state PSAPs as well. Next slide, please. So I have been the chairman of this committee for just over 4 years, and upon assuming that role, once we decided to really dig our heels in and try to get this pushed across the finish line, one of the very first things that we as a committee tried to really embrace and employ was buy-in from the key stakeholders. You know, the people that are going to be affected by this. And in Idaho, the biggest stakeholder of all is the sheriffs. The overwhelming majority of PSAPs in the state of Idaho are operated by the county sheriffs. And in Idaho, we have 44 counties. So one of the biggest stakeholders right out of the gate that we reached out to, fully embraced, collaborated with was the Idaho Sheriff's Association, as well as the chiefs of police. In Idaho, there's 5 cities that have their own primary PSAPs. So we also reached out to them and collaborated with them. As I talk about buy-in from stakeholders, and I've listed them out here on my slide, and I'm not going to read all of those, but I would just encourage anybody out there that this is a process you have embarked on or you hope to. When you think about stakeholders, really think big picture. In Idaho, we viewed just about anybody that had some level of interaction or involvement with public safety at one end of the spectrum or the other as a stakeholder. So we reached out to the Idaho Prosecutors Association, the Idaho Fire Chiefs Association, for example. You see Digby listed on there. I'll tell you I don't know if other states use that term, but it's District Interoperability Governance Board. And every district in the state has a Digby, so there's 6 Digbys. We reached out to those Digby boards and asked for collaboration and letters of support. So really, when you're thinking about stakeholders, think big picture. Think much broader than just the police or just the fire or just the EMS, but everybody that has some level of involvement with PSAPs and public safety. And then lastly on my slide is legislative support. Very early on, we reached out to some key legislators in Idaho. One in particular that had a passion for this, was all in from the get-go, and really helped us along the way navigate the legislative process, helped to prepare us for how that would look and how that would work. And she was a really strong ally for this cause. Next slide, please. So a couple of tips based on our experience here in Idaho is listen. So when you embrace these stakeholders, you know, it's really important to have a posture of what is it that they need so that they can get on board with this. It's not all about necessarily what we as a PSAP committee wanted. It had to also have some give and take to it. I will give you one example. The sheriffs were very concerned about a term they used was grandfather clause, and concerned about the new law forcing them to put people through a certification process that perhaps has been doing the job for many, many, many years. What we did with that, we didn't actually make a grandfather clause, if you will, but there's an exemption clause. So as the law currently stands, dispatchers that have been in the position, have been doing the job for 5 years or more full-time, are exempt from having to come into compliance with the new Idaho law. That isn't something that the PSAP committee per se was necessarily excited about, but it points to my second point on this slide, and that is compromise. At times you have to move forward, you have to be willing to compromise on some things. And then lastly, it may take baby steps. You know, 7 years, that certainly is baby steps. So you just have to stay after it and not lose hope. Next slide, please. We also embarked on an education campaign as a committee. And the goal of that, of course, was to enhance public awareness. You know, I spoke all over the state of Idaho with media, with stakeholders at stakeholder organizational group meetings like the Sheriff's Association meeting, just all over the state, talking about how in the state of Idaho, the cook for Red Robin has to have a food safety certification, or the nail technician, you know, doing my wife's nails has to have a state certification for that. The painting contractor has to have a license to do that. And yet our 911 dispatchers who offer life and death instructions to people in the worst moments of their lives do not have to have any kind of hiring standard or training standard. And that was the message that I put out and my committee repeatedly across the state. And it really opened the public's awareness, and even those in public safety, you know, chiefs and sheriffs and police officers, firefighters, that you don't really think about that until it's put to you that way. And that really helped to shore up the support for this. Another huge thing that we did that was significantly successful was we brought the Denise Amber Lee Foundation to Idaho in May of 2015. And they did a statewide tour, started at the top of the state, and literally in 1 week did a total of 9 training sessions across the state of Idaho. In addition to the Denise Amber Lee Foundation doing those training sessions and telling the story of that tragedy from South Florida, we invited local media to every single one of those 9 training sessions. And we had local media, either print, television, or radio, and in some cases all 3, at those events. And so literally in a 1 week period of time, the entire state of Idaho news was covering this story and the significant impact that this story had on the 911 profession in Florida, and really why this is such an important issue to have hiring and training standards. We advertised that training, and we also marketed that training. It was free. We were able to bring it to Idaho for free through some corporate sponsorships. So we marketed it to the attendees, not just for dispatchers, but also for first responders, chiefs of police, sheriffs, and the media, and our legislative partners as well. And then lastly, the last point on this slide is we published our proposed rules and proposed legislative language on the PSAP Standards and Training Committee website. We did everything we knew how to do to make the proposed law and rules as transparent as we could possibly make it, which I think was vitally important. Next slide, please. So as I said, transparency, we did that by publishing those rules. We also did that by publishing our monthly meeting minutes, which we do as a matter of routine anyhow. But that way, you know, there was no, when you talk about embracing your stakeholders, one of the most important things, especially when you're working on some kind of a legislative mandate, is for those stakeholders to have confidence and comfort in what you're doing and know that they can go and read and understand exactly what it is that's being proposed. And so that was very successful. We also held forum meetings across the state, and we included the chiefs, sheriffs, fire chiefs, those kinds of folks. Next slide, please. So we're ready to go to the legislative process now. One of the first and most important things is to find a sponsor for the bill. In the state of Idaho, the natural fit for that was the Idaho Sheriff's Association, who was a strong supporter of this. As a matter of fact, you don't need to back up on the slides, but I'll just tell you I was referencing the Denise Amber Lee Foundation training that was statewide and how we were able to have that as free for the attendees because of corporate sponsorships. And one of the sponsors of that training was the Idaho Sheriff's Association. So they were a huge supporter of this proposal from the get-go. They were our sponsors for the legislative process, and their lobbyist, who is a former prosecutor, very well known in the state of Idaho, well known at the State House, very articulate man, sharp guy, Mike Kane, was our advocate, if you will, our spokesman for pushing this bill across the finish line and interfacing with the legislators. We also received letters of support from every possible stakeholder we could imagine. All those that were listed on my slide a couple of slides ago wrote letters of support for this. Those letters of support were provided to key legislators both on the House and the Senate as we had one-on-one meetings with those legislators. So not only could they hear our pitch and hear the articulation for why this was such an important thing, but they could see the strong support that there was across the entire spectrum of public safety in Idaho. We literally, I think we had like 28 letters of support. So it was a huge outpouring of support. The bill went before the Judiciary and Rules Committee first on the Senate side, and then, of course, after it made its way through the Senate, it went to the House side, where it started in the same subcommittee on the House side, Judiciary and Rules. Next slide, please. So I'm not going to read this entire law, but I put it on here just so folks that have some interest can actually go back and peruse it later. But a couple of key points for this. The top one there, the top point, Idaho Code 195101, it defines an emergency communications officer. That's what we've called them in the state of Idaho, and it is any emergency call taker or dispatcher whose primary responsibility is to receive or dispatch calls for emergency services. So note, as I put in the point there that there is no distinction between a primary PSAP and a secondary PSAP. All employees that work for a PSAP, period, must meet the new law. The other thing is Idaho Code 1951-19, which establishes the authority and directs that the Idaho Post Council shall be the certifying agency for the dispatchers. So in Idaho, police officers, detention officers, probation and parole officers, those folks are all trained and certified through Idaho Post. And under the new law, that is the same process for the emergency communications officer position now. Next slide, please. In the law, the Idaho Public Safety Communications Commission, the 911 Commission, is responsible for recommending to Idaho Post, what those minimum basic training and certification standards should be. The PSAP Standards and Training Committee went with what the national recommended minimum training standards are that were released by NENA and APCO in the summer of 2016. And those are the standards that Idaho has decided to adopt in large part. Note, as I said earlier, it does not have a grandfather clause, but it does have an exemption clause. The law states that anybody that was hired after July 1st of 2017 shall be certified, shall meet a hiring standard and a training and certification standard within 18 months of hire. Next slide, please. So the Idaho training requirement, as I said, it's largely the APCO-NENA recommended minimum training guidelines. I think I used the word standard earlier, but they're guidelines. The one difference for Idaho is because it is a Idaho Post certification. Post requires ethics to be incorporated into that training as well. So the bottom point on this slide, you see ethics on there. The rest of those are the standard guidelines that came out of APCO and NENA, you know, interpersonal communications, 911 call processing, and so on and so forth. So it is a basic telecommunicator standard or guideline. It's not for the you know, the advanced kind of training, but it at least gives that foundational level that all dispatchers will have going forward. Next slide. So we have the Idaho law. After 7 years and hard work and collaboration and traveling all over the state and doing media blitzes and statewide training, as you see on my slide, success is sweet. It went before the Senate, and it started on the Senate side. It went through the subcommittee there and passed out of the subcommittee unanimously, went to the full Senate floor where it passed unanimously. Went over to the House, came out of the subcommittee of the House, passing unanimously, and in the full House, it passed with 65 yeas and only 4 nays. So it was just a phenomenal experience, and it was a bipartisan support, as you can see. Governor signed the law on April 19th, 2017, and it became effective this past July 1st. Next slide, please. So a couple of lessons learned. I would say, first of all, keep it simple. Don't try to put too much in the package all at once, and I'll give you an example. In Idaho, this is just a hiring and a basic training certification requirement. This doesn't do anything with regards to EMD or EFD or EPD requirements. In fact, in the state of Idaho, we still need to pursue those things. But it can become too cumbersome if you try to do too much all at once. So keep it simple. Third point, emotional, tearful testimony is not always effective. You can't always control that. You know, when we had hearings in front of the subcommittees, you have passionate people, folks that are in the profession that are excited about this and want to see it happen, and they come in and they want to testify, and that certainly is their right, and we fully embrace that. But we did learn, and we received some pretty strong feedback from some of the legislators that getting up there and telling some kind of a sob story and getting emotional and all of that actually doesn't play as well as one might think. So just something to keep in mind. And then lastly, Rule of 80, that's an Idaho term. That's our public safety, public employees retirement system. All public employees are on PERSI in Idaho, but police and fire are under Rule of 80. The rest are under Rule of 90. And there was an effort this year this past year, to move dispatchers onto the Rule of 80 so they would be in the same retirement system as police and fire. And again, to my first point, keep it simple and don't try to achieve too much. That was not successful. It actually went down. It didn't even get out of committee. And so that was a good lesson learned for us, that you cannot try to do too many things at one time. Next slide. I think that's pretty much it for my presentation and on what our Idaho experience was, and be happy to answer any questions anyone might have.
Thank you, Captain Haight. We will proceed with the Q&A portion of our session. And again, just a quick reminder, you can use the WebEx chat feature or press the raise your hand button.
Thank you, Sherry. Our first question: was there much pushback from the PSAPs on this, and was there a need to create buy-in?
Great question. Questions. To the first part of that question, no. We did not get hardly any pushback from the PSAPs, and as a matter of fact, I can't think of any pushback from the PSAPs whatsoever. We did work on creating some buy-in by just doing the educational piece that I talked about, the collaborating, the public forums that we did around the state where folks could come in and we could discuss the proposal and where it was headed, so that everybody was, you know, understanding kind of what was driving this, you know, and what we hope to gain by doing this. But in doing that and keeping it very open and transparent, we had very strong buy-in across the board.
Thank you. How do you fund this certification?
Okay, that's a good question. So the Idaho Public Safety Communications Commission received some grant funding from the Idaho Public Utilities Commission that will pay Post for the administrative costs of issuing certifications and, in some cases, decertifications, because keep in mind, in Idaho, it's not just a training requirement, it's also a hiring standard. So moving forward, dispatchers will have to meet some pretty high hiring standards as well. So there's some grant funding that was provided that will reimburse Post for the administrative costs of this certification process. As far as the funding piece for tuition to attend the training, that is at the expense of the agency. The Idaho Post Academy, Dispatch Academy, which is currently 2 weeks long, is only a $400 per student tuition. And I failed to mention this earlier, but our proposal in Idaho is to also have an online option for agencies who can't either afford to send their folks to dispatch academy for 2 weeks and all the per diem and housing costs that come with that, or they don't have the staffing levels that would give them the luxury of sending somebody off for a couple of weeks. So there is also going to be an online training module available. At the current moment, it looks like that is also going to be produced by Post, and it will be an Idaho module. But again, the tuition is $400 per student. Our stakeholders knew that from the outset, and we never received any pushback or concern about that marginal cost for tuition for their employees.
Thank you. The next question has 2 parts. How much fire training is included in this standard, and how are fire-only PSAPs included in the IPAWS certification?
Great questions. So the second part of that question I'll answer first. There are 0 fire-only PSAPs in the state of Idaho currently. And I fully recognize that's not the case in some states, but yeah, in Idaho currently there are 0 fire-only PSAPs. As far as the training and how much fire training is included in the standard, it's very minimal. Again, the basic training is just the very core basics of call taking, radio communications, handling stressful situations. It's a basic entry-level basic telecommunicator training course, and it kind of plays back to what I said at the beginning of my presentation, where you've got to take things in baby steps. We do foresee EMD and possibly even EFD being a requirement within the state at some point in the future. But for this basic training, it's just a very basic level telecommunicator course.
Okay. For the individuals that voted nay on the legislation, do you know what their major concerns were?
It's a great question. It was very interesting. One of those folks that voted nay was on the House Judiciary and Rules Committee, and in that committee she voted in favor of it because it was unanimous in committee. Nothing changed regarding the statute or the language in the statute from the time it left committee until the full House voted on it. So the only assumption that we could come to would be Idaho is a very, very conservative state, and I think those couple of people that voted nay, it was more of just out of principle, because here this is another regulation, it's another government control thing. But I'm speaking kind of off of an assumption with that answer.
Okay, thank you. The next question, I didn't see where you involved telephone companies in your process. Were they excluded from this process?
They weren't specifically excluded. As a matter of fact, as I said earlier, we received a Public Utilities Commission grant for this specific process. So to some degree, they were involved, I guess, through the PUC. But our 2 primary telcos, Frontier and CenturyLink in Idaho, they were not involved in any formal level with it, but they weren't excluded. It's just kind of the way that went down.
Okay. In reference to all of the topics in the state-mandated training, did the committee write the entire program, or are you using an existing program?
So the committee is currently updating the Dispatch Academy learning objectives that has been taught under the voluntary standards for several years. The committee that I chair, there is a subcommittee of that committee that is currently working on those learning objectives and updating them to fit with not only what Idaho feels is important, but including the minimum guidelines that came out of APCO and NENA. So they will include all of those minimum guidelines, but then there's just a couple of things that it's being enhanced with Idaho-specific requirements. One off the top of my head that I referenced earlier is the ethics component, or the ethics requirement for being in a public position of trust.
All right. I want to thank both of our speakers, Chief Lucero and Captain Haight. And I know that we still have a few questions that we did not get time to answer. I want to assure everyone that we will email those questions to each of the speakers, and we will post their replies along with the slide deck and recording of today's presentation on 911.gov. And I'd like to ask Lori, do you have any closing remarks?
I'd just like to echo my thanks. You guys did a great job. There was an awful lot of really useful information that you shared with folks, and I really appreciate your time and your expertise.
Yes, thank you. So this will conclude today's webinar. We appreciate everyone's participation. And as I mentioned, an archived version of today's webinar will be available on 911.gov soon. The next webinar is scheduled for Tuesday, December the 12th at noon Eastern, and the speakers will be David Hall, Tim May, and Curtis Sutton. We hope that everyone will be able to join us. Thank you, and have a great rest of your Tuesday.